Okay, so we start a new Mishnah. Just by words of introduction, the sugya we're about to learn is a very subtle sugya. It really needs quite careful, nuanced thought. I don't think it's as sort of technically complicated as some of the previous topics, but the svaros are quite profound. With the title of the sugya we're going to be learning is really bosses. So the broad brushstroke idea is that when you have something non-Muktza, but sitting on it or placed in it as a Muktza item, the recipient utensil is serving the object sitting on top of it, and thus deemed, to some extent, some ways, set aside for itself for Muktza use, and inherits, therefore, the Muktza status of the Muktza object that's on top of it. The Mishnah that we're going to learn at the bottom of Kufchaf Hey Omud Aleph, on the top of Kufchaf Hey Omud base, has in addition a separate section about the Pekak of the Chaloin, which gets into the melachot of boineh. So we're not going to focus on that for now. We'll get there eventually, but for now we're just learning the Muktza elements of the Mishnah. And I want to read the first part of the Mishnah and have a look at Rashi, and then read the Gemara, and then just try and understand the points that I'm going to focus on. I put in the whole Shulchan Aruch and Mishnah Berurah and Shatzion because it's all very interesting and very connected to the topic of bosses. But I also tried to put in sort of lighter font, the grey font, because I don't want to overwhelm people. The bit that we're going to sort of talk about a little bit more, but it's all very obviously it's all very important. So the Mishnah says that HaEven SheBeKiruya, Kiruya seems to be, Rashi says, the last, some sort of form of gourd or marrow or the like, which was used seemingly as a bucket to draw water up from a well or something like that. That's how I'm picturing it. And the problem is it floats, so therefore you need a stone in it to weigh it down. So if the stone is attached to the bucket, effectively it's a kedi, it's a specified stone, and therefore it's a kedi. If the stone is not attached to the bucket properly, then it's just a stone, and the stone is Muktza. And Rashi adds in, not only is the stone Muktza, but the bucket, the dalas, becomes a bossis to it. Now let's just read the Mishnah. If the stone doesn't fall, which Rashi explains means it's attached, then then you can use it. You can fill it with water on Shabbos. And if not, then you can't fill it. Rashi says the bottom Rashi. It's like other stones. In other words, it doesn't become a kedi. It hasn't been specified to become a kedi. And if you can't move the gourd, the shavya bosses because it becomes a bosses for the stone that it carries. So this is that's Rashi's pshat in the Gemara. And there's a little bit of a chiddush in this, because you could have perhaps thought about avoiding the word bosses and simply said you can't move the bucket because it's got a Muktza stone in it. And if you're moving the bucket, you're moving the stone, and you can't move stones on Shabbos because they're Muktza. But Rashi brings in the concept of bosses. Now, I did put in the source sheet the Rishash, and I hope people managed to have a look at it. If you didn't, please do have a look at it. The Rishash references Rashi in Mentes Omud Aleph, and there there's a discussion about. I'll just explain the Rishash's question. We won't look at the answers yet, but there's a discussion about a kedera, a pot, which has gizei tzemeh, has strands of wool on it, and these strands of wool are not processed to have become cloth or garment yet, and therefore they're muktzah, they're just fibers. And there Rashi seems to say it doesn't, a very important svara, it does not become a bossis, the kedera does not become a bossis to the gizei tzoin. Why? Because the concept of gizei tzemeh, because the concept of bossis is that the base, the utensil on which the Muktza is placed, is serving the Muktza item. Whereas with the gizei tzemeh, it's the opposite. The wool strands are serving the pot. They're there to help the pot do what it does. They're there to sort of seal the pot and ensure that the heat doesn't escape and the liquid doesn't escape and so on, and protect the lid of the pot. So all the reasons you have lids on pots so that dirt can't get in and so on. So you can't argue that's a bossis. The whole svara of bossis is that the under utensil is tofel, is somehow rendered means to the over utensil, because it's the if I have a drawer and in the drawer is a Muktza pen, what's more chashuv, the drawer or the pen? The answer is the drawer is a secondary need. What I really want is my pen, and the drawer is there to serve the pen as a storage space for the pen, and therefore the drawer becomes bossis. That's the logic of bossis. Whereas over here, and even where the under KD has its own importance, bosses can still make sense in Hilchas Muktza, because at least I've partly specified the use of the under thing for the thing sitting on top of it. So if I put my purse deliberately on a chair and I want to leave it there, even though the chair has a great chashivas, an independent significance beyond the wallet with money in, nonetheless, I've chosen to dedicate the chair, at least partially, to serving the needs of the wallet, as a place for the wallet to sit. And therefore, again, that's enough to make it a bossis. However, with the Gizei Tzemer, says Rashi, in the Rashash's understanding of Rashi, I haven't made the pot there as the servant of the Gizei Tzemer. If anything, I've done the opposite. I want the Gizei Tzemer to help the pot. Therefore, Rashi seems to hold that doesn't become a bossis. You could argue against that svara. It's not a muchach svara. You could argue nonetheless, since I want them to work together, therefore I want the pot to hold the tzemer, even though I also want the tzemer to help the pot. But because I want the tzemer to help the pot, therefore I want the pot to support the tzemer. Nonetheless, Rashi seems to reject the argument. So Shash asks over here, similarly, surely the stone is there to serve the gourds, to serve the kiruya, not the other way around, and therefore bosses shouldn't apply. We're going to put that question on hold. Normally, I wouldn't look at that sort of question because it's a sort of side question in Sugya, but we're going to see it's going to become very, very important. The answers to this question are going to become very important because we're using the Sugya really as a chance to think, I hope, quite subtly and carefully about the concepts of bosses. Yeah.
There were two different rationales. One is what
yes.
The cut off a nutshell.
Yes.
And the other logic was you're moving the base. Yes, they're totally separate, but it means you're moving the item on the top, which is not.
Okay, beautiful. So this is really what we're going to explore. We visited it to remind people of the Maran Comments on Kuf Chaf Gimel Amud Aleph, and have a look at the sugya there again. And I didn't put it on the sheets because I didn't want to overwhelm everyone, but I'm going to leave that as the next week's project, as the next year's project. Look there, and also look at Tosfos there, who discusses if you forgot something and you didn't deliberately place it there, and so on and so forth. But okay, since Gary's mentioned this, there are two ideas floating around, which sort of emerges also from the top of Kuf Chaf Hey Amud base, the idea of Nior. There's two reasons why you might not be able to move a object. Reason number one is because because it itself has become Muktza, because it's sort of become infected with the Muktza of the item on top of it. Infected is just a quick metaphor for what we mean, which is that it's become dedicated somewhat to the Muktza use of the item sitting on top of it, in which case it has its own Muktza status. The other aspect going on over here, which seems to be nothing to do with bosses, it's a completely separate lomdas, is that by moving the bosses, I'm also moving the Muktza item, and I can't move Muktza items on Shabbos. I'm coming into the sugya assuming these are two separate lomdases. One is a logic of bosses, that the under KD is serving to some degree or other the over KD, and therefore becomes Muktza in its own right. And a separate one has nothing to do with the under KD, is not a bosses at all. Who cares whether it's a bosses or not? But the fact is, by moving the under KD, I'm moving the over KD, and therefore I'm moving Muktza, and that's the problem. That's my assumption. What really, to steal the punchline of where we're going to go, is that Rashi's view is that these two concepts are not as separable as that. That even when it comes to the second svara of nothing to do with under KD, I'm just moving the upper KD, and if I'm indirectly moving up, so that's a problem. That's also a bosses type svara, and you are 100% correct, Gary, that we saw the same idea in Kuf Chaf Gimel Amud Aleph. We're simply, in a sense, doing a more thorough chazara now on that idea. So just to summarize, I came into pre-learning Masechet Shabbat Be'iyun, I came into the whole topic thinking, and this may be true halacha l'maaseh, by the way, that there are two separate things floating around. One is bossis, which is that the underkeli has its own halachic status because it's got the Muktza sitting on top of it. And the separate thing is that indirectly, by moving an under utensil, I'm also moving an over thing, and therefore I'm moving the Muktza, and therefore I have to grapple with the second issue of I'm moving the Muktza. And that is correct, by the way. There are two separate lambdas floating around over here, according to everyone. Rashi, though, seems to think that even when I'm talking about the second element of indirectly moving the Muktza, I need to come onto bossis type logic in order to properly understand it, and we'll have to analyze that. That's really what's going to be the journey that we're going to go on, moving away from this sort of bifurcated view of two separate sugyas, at least in Rashi's worldview, to a more merged set of concepts where they're both aspects of being Hilchos Bossis. But for now, we're ignoring all of that. We're simply saying that Rashi says that the problem is that the stone makes the dalas Muktza, and if I can't move the bucket either. Question number one, why do you need to say that? Surely you can explain that you can't move the bucket without the logic of bosses just because you're indirectly moving the stone. And secondly, Rashi seems to contradict himself because Rashi earlier seems to say that this would not fall under the category of bosses as per the Rishash's question. So that's I labelled it the Rishash question just because that was what my Bar-Ilan had on to print, and it was just the clearest exposition of it. But it's a well asked, it's just a well oiled question, a well oiled stew in Rashi. Yes, Adam.
The serving each other, there is a slight difference, I'm thinking, in terms of with the gourd and the stone.
Mm-hmm.
You still need both items. I mean, you need the gourd to go down as your bucket. You need your stone to weigh it down. So the serving, but you need both parts together. It seems a little bit different to the semer on top of the kisui.
I think that's a very nice answer. I think that's a very beautiful answer. The Chasam Sofer says this answer, and it's a very good answer. Just for those online, or just expand on that answer. The truth is, I was going to put this Rishash's question on hold and unpick it later, and there's several distinctions you can draw between the two scenarios. But I think probably the best distinction is, and the most useful one, is the one you just said, which is that with the gizei tzemeh, you have a pot. A pot is a pot. It pots away perfectly well with or without the gizei tzemeh. I want to add something to it, therefore I use the strands of wool. Says the Rashi that you can't make the pot a bossis for the strands of wool. The strands of wool are the junior partner over here, adding a little bit of resistance to the pot. Whereas over here, you have something very different. You have a partnership of equals, because the pot can't work without the stone. I mean, the stone without the pot is useless, but the pot without the stone is just a stone. But the pot without the stone also is useless because it'll just float in the water. It won't descend into the well. So you have a partnership of they're both necessary. They are a merged joint activity. So maybe in that case, Rashi would agree that this is a bossis. There's a lot of it's very reasonable that it would be a bossis because they're both. You can't argue that the stone is the pot. The stone is serving the pot. They are both jointly serving the needs of the again with the lid and the pot. They are in a sense doing separate functions. The pot does what the pot does, and the lid independently serves the food. Here, they have to work together as a team in order to do what they do. And therefore, you could argue that the pot is dependent on the stone, and therefore, if the stone is Muktza, the pot's also Muktza. To summarize, bossis isn't just a magic rule. We need to each case think about it with care. There's always a logic in bossis of that the non-Muktza item is somehow ruined by the Muktza item because it's somehow since the Muktza item is not Muchen for Shabbos, the bossis also is to some degree also not Muchen Shabbos. Now I'm not claiming where to draw the line is always clear, and there may indeed be arguments between the Rishonim and the Poskim about where to draw the line. But in each case, we need to think how far along the spectrum is it of its own use being no longer prepared for Shabbos because of the Muktza item's use. So the simplest scenario is where the non-Muktza item is serving the Muktza item, the drawer with the pen inside it. The opposite extreme is, let's say, according to Rashi's scenario, where the Muktza item is purely serving and assisting the non-Muktza item. So how can you say the non-Muktza item is dedicated to the service of the Muktza item? Over here, Adam is correctly pointing out, actually, we have a middle scenario, so we don't know anything about Rashi's view, where he would draw the line. There you have the two only able to function together. If the bucket can't function without a Muktza item, you can well hear a logic that the bucket should be Muktza, because if the stone is Muktza, which is the case of the detached stone, and the bucket can't function without the stone, then of course the bucket is not prepared for Shabbos use because it can't function without a non-prepared Muktza item. That would be the logic, and I rate this as a beautiful story. I think it's very, very clear, nice distinction. Okay, Is everyone with me in this? So again, we're going to spend quite a lot of time working out the nuances of this, but the headlines of the sugya we've already really hit. Two headlines that I wanted to draw out. I didn't think I'll get to it so early, but between Gary and Adam's comments, we've got there in terms of headlines, even though the details there to be worked out. The first headline is there's two things we always need to think about. Hilchos bosses, that irrespective of me moving the Muktza item, the non-Muktza item has become non-Muchen because the Muktza is sitting on top of it. And there's a separate question about moving the Muktza item. How closely are these two sorts of svaras intertwined? Are they both bosses things or two separate halachas? That's one headline that we need to think about. And the second one is, in Hilchos bosses, we always need to reflect on to what degree is the non-Muktza item contaminated by the Muktza item, or to put it more accurately, to what degree is the non-Muktza item not Muchen for its use because it's dependent on the Muktza item, and therefore if part of its functionality is Muktza, then you can't use the whole thing for Shabbos because it's not Muchen for Shabbos because it's relying on something which is not Muchen for Shabbos. That's always going to be that's going to be the key svara that really we learn the rest of the sugya with. Those are the two headlines, and we're now just going to try and work through this. Yeah.
Of the buckets that have to be in melachot, so that this pumpkin can't be used to store lentils, for example. You have to be designated.
So the logic of why a bucket is not Muktza and therefore can be, let's take a regular bucket or a regular pot. The reason it's not Muktza is because its primary function is to serve me in a non-Muktza way, and now that it's a keli, it can be used for anything else. Here, its primary function is ruined by only being able to work in partnership with the Muktza item. That's what it means to be a bosses. Yeah. And therefore, since it loses its primary function, now we would define it as Muktza, either Muktza machmas kufa, which it couldn't even be used, the Sorot kufa, the Sorot and Komo, or Klishim Lachtan Issa, and we'll have to work that out, and therefore it could be used for other tashmishim. But again, it's true that this gourd, if I use this gourd as a salad bowl, it would be a perfectly good salad bowl. But its very status as a keli is because I set it aside as a bucket, and it can't bucket away without the stone. It loses its very primary function because it can't do that without the stone, and the stone is not muchen for Shabbos. That's not because
you can't change your mind. I don't want
the whole logic of Shabbos is that something is muchen at the beginning of Shabbos. What is its status when Shabbos starts? You can't change functionality on Shabbos. And when Shabbos came in, its use was dependent on something which was beferish not prepared for Shabbos use, which is what a stone is. Yeah.
Just into that Don's question, was that because to see ultimately you think the delat is food, and therefore should be Muktza? Is that why Rashi has to say it's the ovation?
Yes, yeah.
Status being food because it's completely dried out.
So I don't know if that's why Rashi says it, but you're correct in Metzias that it's dried out, and therefore we're not talking about food. I'm picturing, I don't know much about pumpkins, but I'm picturing the husk of the pumpkin, and I'm picturing that if it's wet, it would go moldy. So I imagine they used to dry it in the sun, so it would become like hard wood, and then they would then it was a perfectly good bucket. But I've never drawn water with a pumpkin, so. Correct. So, yeah, so I'm agreeing with you. It certainly isn't food, and the reason it's not food is because it's just the husk of a pumpkin that's dry. Whether that's why Rashi says it, or just because that's the metzias of how you make a bucket that doesn't go moldy, I don't know. But the point you're making is correct. It certainly can't be food. Yeah. Anyway.
So Rashi says about the stone, it's not attached. Right?
Yes.
Apparently, Kashar
Yes.
It's like all other steps.
Yes.
And therefore it's
Yeah.
It isn't like all other steps because it's weighting down your barrel.
True. Okay, so I maybe should have spent a bit of time just considering this. True, but this gets us back to the previous sugya that there's nothing unique about it. I can just pick up any other stone. It's simply a stone from the floor, which I happen to be using, and any other stone that in no way has it been. Since a stone is just a stone, and there's thousands of other stones, it's not a keli. Unless something's been done to it to make it into a keli, it just remains a random stone. If I polish it and clean it and make it into a paperweight, now I've made it into a keli. That's what it means to make something into a keli. If I attach it to the bucket, indicating that now this is one functionality, and then if not, there's nothing in it. So this stone falls out, just become another stone. There's nothing that's miyachid it for the tashmish of a person. Yeah. Okay, so that's we've never really we've touched on this sort of svara a few times. We've never really done it thoroughly, and I can't actually remember if we'll get a chance to do it in these sugyas or not. But if I do want to make something non-Muktza into something Muktza into non-Muktza, how do I repurpose it? To what degree do I have to be miyachid it? We spoke a little bit about if I have a regular DIY hammer, but I keep it in my cutlery drawer as a permanent coconut cracker. would it not be a kli shemelachta issa, which I can use to crack coconuts, but kli shemelachta leheta, right? If I have an axe, which I use for chopping meat. So how do you repurpose things, and to what degree of yichud do you have to do, is its own topic. But this Evan has not been repurposed. It's simply a stone. It's just a random stone. So it's got nothing making it into a keli. That's the logic. Okay, I just want to touch on use the last 5 minutes really just to ask a question, and then we'll stop for today. There's a very, very difficult Rashi on the first bit of Gemara. So all we've done so far is we've just read the first case of the Mishnah, and I'm going to miss out the next case of the Mishnah Zemora just for the interest of time, and we're going to move on to the Gemara Tanan Hassam. Tanan Hassam. Now, first of all, Rashi points out that this is a Mishnah later on in the Perek in Kuf Mem Beis, I think Kuf Mem Beis on base. And I would suggest it's essential to look up the Mishnah inside, because Rashi is going to reference the whole Mishnah. Now, Even she'al pi chavis, mata al sito v'hu nefeles. So a stone placed on a chavis. So the chavis is a barrel. It's not Muktza. It stores liquids inside it. The stone is used just as a Muktza temporary weight or something that you've put on top of it, but it's Muktza. So you have a bossis scenario. Says the Gemara, the Mishnah, I'm sorry, you can tilt the chavis and you can, the stone will fall off and then you can use it. This is known as Nior, and we're going to learn a lot about Nior, which seems to mean that the chavis is not a bossis, because otherwise you couldn't tilt it. Our only issue is that I'm moving the Muktza item. So for tzorech, given the need, you can tilt the chavis and therefore the Muktza item falls off, and you've resolved the issue of moving the Muktza item, and now all you've got is bossis issues, and we're not worried about bossis. So again, this is the case of these two halachas dealing with each other. If the chavis were to become a bossis, then you couldn't move the chavis, because now you tilt off the stone, but too late. The chavis itself is Muktza because it caught Muktza status from the stone. But since the chavis is not a bossis, my only issue is moving the stone. I can tilt the stone and it won't be a problem. Says Rav Ami on this, and we're going to see that Rav Asi argues he has a different Masorah from Rabbi Yochanan, but Rav Ami's version of his Masorah from Rabbi Yochanan was that this is only where it didn't become a bossis because shochach, you forgot. So if you placed a stone on top of the chavis becomes a bossis, and therefore you can't tilt the chavis. You haven't achieved anything. Fine, you've knocked the stone off, but the chavis is still a bossis. However, if you were not maniach, but you forgot it there, we saw this earlier in Tosfos, but just to remind you again of this, here's really the source in the Gemara. Then it was a Tosfos, but this is the source in the Gemara of Shochat. If you forgot something, that means you never specified the chavis to be the placeholder of the stone, and if you never made the chavis the bossis topel, deemed to be there to serve the stone, and therefore the chavis doesn't become Muktza a bossis, and therefore you can tilt the chavis, get the stone off, and then you've solved the problem. What I've just said is the simplest reading of the Gemara, and precisely not how Rashi learns the Gemara, because Rashi says that the Rav Ami's point is going on the different section of this Mishnah. Now, often when the Gemara quotes sources, it quotes part of it and not the whole source, but it wants us to know the whole source. Nonetheless, it's always a bit of a catch to say that in the Gemara, but that is what Rashi does. And I appreciate this is a difficult Rashi that maybe people missed, but we have to hear Rashi properly. Rashi says that this very Mishnah, which is the come on, says that not only can you shake off the stone and move the barrel, but if you can't tilt the barrel to shake off the stone, because the stone will fall on other barrels and damage them, then you can actually carry the barrel around with the stone on top of it. And it's on that halacha that Rav Ami says it's only if shochach, but not if you were deliberately maniach. But on the halacha of tilting the barrel, even if it was maniach, you could do that. Very, very important Rashi. So again, just let's hear the maths of Rashi. First technical problem is that the bit of the Mishnah the Gemara quotes is not the relevant bit. Okay, it happens occasionally and we can live with that. But secondly, what is Rashi saying? Rashi is saying there's two halachas. Halacha number one is that you can tilt a barrel and the stone falls off. That is the halacha whether the barrel becomes a bossis or doesn't become a bossis. You can tilt the barrel and it can fall off. Even if you were maniach the Evan there, you can tilt the barrel and it can fall off, and you can do so. The second halacha that Rashi says is that the second halacha the Mishnah says, is that you can carry the barrel around with the stone on if you have no choice. And that, says Rav Ami, is only if you accidentally forgot the stone there, but not if you deliberately placed it there. What on earth is going on? What are these two halachas? Number one. And number two, as the Mashal and really many Rishonim point out, this is an enormously confusing Rashi because he contradicts what he says over there, in which he says exactly the opposite over there. He says that if it becomes a bosses, you can't even tilt it, which is the logic. The whole logic of bosses, if it becomes a bosses, is what does it help you that you're tilting it? You're still moving the barrel. Fine, you knocked off the Muktza item, but the barrel is Muktza. And if you are maniach, then surely it becomes a bosses, and how can you move it? This is part of a family of Rashis in which he has arguably a different view of bosses, and which he intertwines the two concepts in a much more profound way. And that's what we're going to spend the next shir really looking at. There's a difficult Mashal to work your way through, but I'm afraid we do have to work our way through the Mashal who points out this problem. And I may give you a few more sources of other Rashis elsewhere. But you're on for an adventure, gentlemen. So look forward to it. Yes, Adam.
I couldn't say simply that Rashi just doesn't hold the tilting is movable.
The problem is Rashi says not like that elsewhere. And the deeper problem is what do you achieve by tilting? Okay, so you've knocked the stone off, but what now? What do you want to do? You now want the HaEven. You want the chavis. The point of the tilting is to allow you to move the chavis, and you haven't achieved anything because the chavis is still a bosses.
No, but if he's saying that the tilting is not a
true. There's truth in what you're saying. That we'll have to look at what Nior is. It's less of a tiltal. But the point of doing the Nior is to get the stone off so that you can then get to the chavis and use the chavis. And that's the problem over here. Yeah. No, we'll see later. Yeah. The assumption of this is that you can now move the chavis itself. Yeah. Okay, so we'll get to all of this later. For now, all I want to do is point out a very, very difficult Rashi. And we're going to have to accept it. That's what Rashi says. I mean, that's how Rashi learned the Sukkah. There may be there's a simpler way of learning the Sukkah, but that's how Rashi learned the Sukkah, and we'll have to understand it.
What do you think in the Rashi? I'm missing that bit.
Lo shoni to mutter the total hachavis for Evan or Leah. To Ketoni, and now he quotes the other part of the Mishnah. It's between other barrels, and if you're afraid to tilt it, so that the stone doesn't fall on the barrel by its side. Then magbia or matal tito fellas. Then you can lift it up, not just Nior, but you can actually lift it up.
But how can we
That's what we need to understand. What's the logic? What's the link of Shecheach to that?
Is that implying the word that it's provoking?
Yeah, that's exactly what Rashi says. Rashi says that in that case. Okay, go through it and we'll talk about it next. Okay, I wish everyone a good